Hello everyone, my name is JON MCCOSH. I'm an environmental and agricultural practitioner at the Institute of Natural Resources. The work I will be presenting today is a collective effort from our team that has been working on this project, in particular my colleagues Sershin and Bridget. The Conservation Symposium is an ideal space for practitioners to share ideas and stories, and I appreciate the opportunity to share ours. I've titled this presentation with a nod to the King, as it is my view and experience that it is necessary to act on the urgent need for investment in ecological infrastructure and ecological restoration, which I will talk to in this presentation. The story begins with our work in the Upper Umkomazi catchment. The catchment is located in KwaZulu-Natal to the south of Pietermaritzburg and Durban. The total catchment size is approximately 430,000 hectares in extent, with the Upper Umkomazi making more than half of this at about 250,000 hectares. The source of the Umkomazi is in the Drakensberg, arising more than 3,000 meters above sea level, close to Thaba-Nclenyana, the highest peak in southern Africa. With pristine grasslands and abundant herds, the highest part of this upper catchment is protected and is particularly important as a source of runoff. Moving southward from the Drakensberg into private and communal tenure land, we find that the remainder of the upper catchment is a combination of plantation timber, rural homesteads and mixed farming systems, mostly dryland crop production and grazing. There are an estimated 6,000 hectares of alien wattle in the upper catchment. There are many areas with signs of degradation. Here you can see erosion as a result of a cattle path running up the hill and resultant gully formation. In other areas there are extensive sheet and rill erosion. Inappropriate past agricultural practices are also an issue. Here you can see the effect of old ploughed lands on duplex soils, where gully heads are extending along the contour lines where water flow is concentrated. Here is another view from Google Earth demonstrating clearly the head cuts along the contour lines of old lands. You can see where the contours have concentrated the runoff, resulting in new head cuts going into the main stem of this particular gully. These forms of degradation ultimately result in deeply incised gullies which deliver substantial volumes of sediment. This can be clearly seen in the high flows of the Umkomazi River. This particular picture was taken after a normal summer storm and highlights the urgent need for restoration interventions in the upper catchment. Umgeni Water and the Department of Water and Sanitation both recognize this challenge, which is particularly relevant in the context of dam infrastructure that is to be established in the catchment. The Umkomazi is the third largest river in KZN in terms of runoff, with a mean annual precipitation of 918 millimeters per annum, delivering about 750 million meters cubed of runoff every year. The upper catchment is located entirely within the southern Drakensberg strategic water source area, part of the 8% of South Africa's land area that provides 50% of our runoff. As such, it is an ideal site for dam development to augment supply of water to the greater Durban area. 2 dams are currently proposed for this catchment. The Smithfield Dam, which is due to be commissioned in around 2030, with a full supply capacity of 252 million cubic meters. Sometime in the future, the Mpendle Dam is proposed around 2050, which will have a full supply capacity of 500 million meters cubed. And this is where the earlier pictures I showed in the presentation become relevant. Sediment in the proposed dams is a major concern. The technical feasibility studies commissioned by the Department of Water and Sanitation estimate that under current landscape conditions, the Smithfield Dam would lose approximately 1/3 of its capacity in a period of 100 years. Under the likely future scenario of accelerated degradation and climate change, the dam is expected to lose 2/3 of its capacity in the same period of 100 years. This may not be long in a political cycle, but for dam infrastructure at an estimated cost of 25 billion rand, this is a substantial risk to the investment being made in the catchment. And this brings me to the story I want to tell. Traditionally, infrastructure referred to various diverse systems for enabling and sustaining society, traditionally human-made and usually built infrastructure. Things such as dams, roads, bridges, and related infrastructure. Since the 1980s, there's been increasing recognition that ecosystems should be considered as a form of infrastructure. And now the concept of ecological infrastructure is in the mainstream. Within the South African context, ecological infrastructure refers to naturally functioning ecosystems that deliver valuable services to people, such as healthy mountain catchments, rivers, wetlands, and related natural areas that together form a network of interconnected structural elements in the landscape. Ecological infrastructure is an asset from which a range of valuable services flow and supports built infrastructure. To touch on ecological infrastructure restoration, the science of ecological restoration relates specifically to the recovery and development of self-sustaining natural systems. Restored systems need not be identical to the historical system, but they should contain biological assemblages of a reference system that is either adjacent or similar in nature. It should have functioning biophysical features and processes and emphasizes the recovery of self-sustaining living systems. Water is generally the default metric that is used due to its immediate relevance to human life and health, and this is exactly the case in our presentation and the proposed dam infrastructure. Numerous studies and research, both locally and internationally, have been conducted to evaluate the costs and benefits associated with the restoration of ecological infrastructure. I'm going to focus only on two specific studies here that relate to sediments, as these are relevant to the Mkomazi catchment. Hughes in 2018 did an analysis of the Mngani catchment and found that there was a potential sediment yield reduction of 1 million meters cubed per year from ecological infrastructure investments. Similarly, Blignard et al. Found that there was potential reduction in the Upper Tugela of 1.9 million tons of sediment per year, and in the Upper Umzimvubu 7.4 million tons per year. These are substantial reductions, and there are a number of other reports and studies that provide similar findings. However, there is general agreement that field-derived quantitative data on which the models are built is limited. And this brings into question what are the real costs of investment in ecological infrastructure. If restoration interventions are to be self-sustaining, obviously the physical interventions need to be well planned. But arguably more important, the social interventions to sustain and maintain the investment are critically important. And these relate to knowledge development, for example, the principles of ecological infrastructure and the value and benefits of ecological infrastructure to land users, and also the skills necessary for managing and maintaining ecological infrastructure. Obviously, any investments in ecological infrastructure must ultimately have meaning and value for the beneficiaries, both local and the downstream beneficiaries. Key indicators must be defined in consultation with beneficiaries, but we must recognize that these are dynamic and will probably evolve and change over time. Finally, they have to be embedded in functional governance systems, local through to national. And these are the real costs that I'm talking about. It's the social interventions, it's the development and refinement of indicators with the beneficiaries, and developing functional local governance systems. Over a period of 8 months, the Institute of Natural Resources undertook, with the support of Umgeni Water, a prioritization process and implemented a number of small-scale pilot restoration interventions in the Upper Mkomazi. The purpose of this was to provide a context with which to initiate discussions with local stakeholders as to how this could be scaled up in a manner that is compatible with local norms and values. The design of the physical interventions was relatively simple. Most are well documented with associated costs provided. However, the knowledge economy associated with restoration, particularly in situ measurements and associated knowledge, is limited. Developing a shared understanding of the system with local users as a focus is critical. This requires knowledge brokers and practitioners who can operate across the science and policy to practice interface. Interpreters, if you will, who understand multiple perspectives through the application of transdisciplinary approaches. In addition, learning practices in relation to a variety of elements, for example, participatory identification of ecological infrastructure, practical learning on restoration activities, and local entrepreneurial development are particularly important. The benefits from restoration activities occur simultaneously and collective across social, economic, and ecological domains, and it is therefore necessary to understand how these domains interact spatially and temporally. Consequently, it is necessary to have a well-established participatory, monitoring, evaluation, reflection, and learning process to inform adaptive management. Before I discuss the PMIL in more detail, I will show a few pictures of the pilot interventions. At our 2 pilot restoration sites, we established a number of different restoration interventions. This picture shows the establishment of brush packs that we established making use of locally available wattle branches. Here you can see another view. Over a period of only 2 months, we observed effective sediment capture and colonization of sediment by grass-informed species. Again, this provides an opportunity for the communities living in the catchment to actively observe these processes at a small scale in the short term. Fortunately, the brush packs also went through winter without being burnt. In particular, the community at Mapanekeni has a policy of no burning. Here you can see brush packs at Amangwaneni, our 2nd pilot site, arguably more degraded than the Mapanekeni site, as you can see from this sheet and rill erosion in this picture. Where there was no adjacent grass for colonization, we reseeded behind the brush packs with indigenous grass mixes, which germinated very successfully. We also introduced Logs and Eco Mattresses. The Ecologs function as barriers to runoff, while the Eco Mattresses provide cover, shade, and moisture for reseeding. Here you can see the part of the Eco Mattress already established, and after about 2.5 months, you could see that a lot of the sediment had been captured in the mattress, and it had provided a nice substrate for the germination of indigenous grass mixes. We also established vetiver grass in gullies. Those who are not familiar with vetiver, it is an exotic, non-invasive species with deep roots and rigid tufts that provide an effective barrier to runoff and erosion. All these activities, although implemented at a relatively small scale, changed an abstract concept into a practice that could be observed and provided the opportunity to talk about the different interventions and how these could be expanded. As part of this process, we also initiated discussions on the concept of rotational resting of livestock. We also discussed how the monitoring of interventions could be achieved. Moving back to our PMIL approach, we know that all these benefits are flowing in the social, economic, and ecological dimensions. From a social perspective, we consider how the restoration interventions impact on local beneficiaries, considering both monetary, for example, direct employment and enterprise development, through to non-monetary benefits such as human well-being and cultural values, leading to an understanding of how local stakeholders benefit from restoration in a variety of ways. And, importantly, the extent to which the value of EI is perceived by local users. We also initiated discussions on long-term maintenance costs and responsibilities. In addition to the local economic benefits, from an economic perspective, we considered the economic value of restoration activities to downstream users. At this stage, we are focusing on local users, but in time we'll cast the net further. From an ecological perspective, we are considering the biophysical aspects of restoration, including hydrology and sediments, the impact of restoration on erosion, and ultimately land cover, land use, and ecosystem functioning. A confounding factor are the intangible benefits which occur across the three domains, and this is something we are still grappling with. To effectively evaluate these impacts through the PMIL process, we have initiated a combination of citizen science and basic science through quantitative and qualitative data collection to understand the impact of the interventions on the ecological, social, and economic domains. This is an iterative approach that will inform adaptive management going forward. Finally, we have to recognize that this approach is embedded within a broader governance and policy context which is playing out at local, provincial, and national scales. Currently, our focus is on building and developing local institutions through learning activities, with citizen scientists playing an important role as local champions who can share knowledge within their communities and the broader science practice community. We are now moving into the next phase of the program, where we will further explore the various elements that will work to sustain our investments in ecological infrastructure. Arguably, the easiest part has been the implementation of the physical interventions. Bringing diverse local stakeholders together and agreeing on important institutional and enterprise arrangements has been far more challenging, and this is where the real costs of restoration become apparent. The initial phase has provided a sound foundation for further discussion and action on restoration in the Upper Mkomazi catchment. So, our experience in the Upper Mkomazi has shown us that there are real challenges we are facing in the South African context and the world at large, relating to the loss and degradation of important ecological infrastructure. Our review and analysis of the various cost-benefit models have shown that they are based largely on model data, and while they do indicate net benefits in most cases, they are in many cases based on remotely sensed data which may not have the required granularity for accurate in-situ assessments. Where the costs are based on real data, these data sets are often limited and not necessarily derived from in-situ information. Finally, and most importantly in my view, many of these costings do not accommodate the soft dimensions associated with restoration. Things like facilitating dialogue, developing a common shared understanding, building the necessary knowledge and capacity that is necessary to sustain and maintain ecological infrastructure investments. We believe that our work in the Mkomazi and our investments are pioneering in terms of interventions in combination with in-situ monitoring and dialogue-based approaches, particularly the role of citizen scientists in informing local level interventions and also engaging at the science policy interface. Our recommendations are that it is critically important to have multidimensional approaches to understand the cost of restoration interventions and their impact through an iterative and adaptive approach. A more systematic approach towards the costing of restoration is required. We need to develop common and systematic monitoring and evaluation and set of common metrics to understand the costs and benefits, both across existing and new projects. We cannot wait to refine the models and approaches. Action is imperative, and we should learn as we go. We still do not understand the real costs and benefits, particularly based on real-world interventions. A final word is that we must remember that these interventions must have meaning and value for people living in catchments they are working in. And I would like to take the opportunity to thank the communities of Mapanekeni and Amangwaneni for embarking on this journey with us. It has been enlightening to understand local perspectives and approaches to natural resource management, to consider how these could be adapted to enhance restoration in these underinvested communal areas. What is the end of this story? We'll tell you next time we see you. But I would like to acknowledge Umgeni Water for their vision in taking pragmatic steps to address degradation and support this initiative in the Mkomazi catchment. Thank you.